Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We are so glad you could join us for our Sustainable House Day expert session. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the stolen lands of many First Nation peoples. I personally am speaking to you from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I would like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. If you like, please do feel free to share which Aboriginal land you're watching from in the chat. Before the webinar begins, we'd like to tell you a bit about Sustainable House Day and Renew. Sustainable House Day is a national event that gives you access to Australia's most sustainable homes. This year, we offered 4 themed weeks of online and in-person events around the country leading up to Sustainable House Day on the 17th of October, when we'll host a day of free online session with homeowners. This week is our Climate Adaptation Week, where we'll discuss the importance of designing to meet the needs of a changing climate. So you can visit sustainablehouseday.com to see detailed house profiles and tour videos for the 130 homes open this year. Sustainable House Day is organised by Renew, a not-for-profit that inspires, enables and advocates for people to live sustainably in their homes and communities. You can find out more about us at renew.org.au. Tonight's session will begin with expert presentations and then move on to a Q&A session. You can ask questions at any point in the webinar using Zoom's Q&A function, which you can find in a toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A and not the chat to ask questions. If you would like the panel to discuss them, if you'd like to chat to your fellow attendees, please feel free to use the chat. We also have live closed captioning for this event. To use it, click on Live Custom View Streaming Service in the upper left-hand corner of your Zoom window and click View Stream to see the automated captioning in a browser window. Now, I am delighted to be handing over to our MC for this evening, which is Renew's very own AJ. He is part of our expert analysis. Oh my gosh, AJ, I've just completely lost your little bio that I had. RJ, I'm going to throw it over to you and let you introduce yourself. Everybody, please welcome RJ.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And hello, everyone. And thanks a lot for joining us today for this webinar on sustainable heating and cooling. As we all know that heating and cooling are often the most energy-intense activities in our homes. As part of our Sustainable House Day Retrofitting Week, this expert session will bring you presentations by experts on how to reduce your need for active heating and cooling, whether you live in the tropics or Tasmania. My name is AJ Huda, and I'm part of Renew's energy expert team, which handles the consults and advice service. I'm very passionate about fighting against climate change and providing the best advice possible in becoming more energy efficient and sustainable. I have background in renewable and sustainable energy, as well as in electrical engineering. We have 2 experts with us who will be presenting today. The first expert is Tim Forcey, who will be presenting on heat pumps. Tim Forcey graduated as a chemical engineer in America during the energy crisis of the late 1970s. Tim then worked in industrial energy for 35 years overseas and in Australia for firms including ExxonMobil, BHP, Gemina, and the Australian Energy Market Operator. Between 2013 and 2017, Tim acted as energy advisor at the University of Melbourne, where he published research into Australia's electricity market, pumped hydro energy storage, methane emissions from unconventional oil and gas production, and the economics of fuel switching from gas to renewable energy alternatives in industry and in homes. Over the last decade, Tim has been in over 1,000 Melbourne homes, acting as a home energy advisor. He worked with the Moreland Energy Foundation, Positive Charge, and the state government with the development of the Victorian Residential Efficiency Scorecard. Tim Forcey has volunteered with Renew and has authored articles published in Renew magazine. Tim created the Facebook group My Efficient Electric Home, where over 8,914,000 members help each other to save money in their ever more comfortable and greener electric homes. That said, I would like to hand over the screen to Tim now, so he will be presenting. Tim?
All right, thanks everyone. Say, we noticed that typo in the bio about having 8 million members in My Efficient Electric Home. We're not quite there yet, but I'll give you the update as to what the real figures are today. So thanks to everyone who's coming in here, and thanks to Renew for giving me the opportunity to present. Let me get this share screen out of the way to make sure I don't screw that up. And that should be the presentation. Okay. The future of heating is cooling. Right, so this is actually my second presentation today. Earlier on, I was presenting to an inquiry. On the western part of Melbourne, the gas industry is going to be installing another pipeline because they want to make sure that they can get peak winter gas to Melbourne on a cold winter day. And they think that they might have trouble doing that. So of course, they just want to keep expanding gas supply infrastructure. My presentation there today was about how we could do this. We could address that situation differently by reducing gas demand. That would make a lot more sense, because what I'll be showing you here tonight is how people can save a lot of money by not burning as much gas. And I'll be talking about the use of heat pumps that you see here, basically reverse cycle air conditioners for heating your lounge room or for heating your water. Heat pumps suck free heat out of the air, and that's why it's so cost effective to use them for heating your living spaces and water, because free heat, well, no one's going to send you a bill for free heat. So that's why they're so cost effective. And yes, a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about here tonight is the stuff that we talk about every single hour of every single day over at the Facebook group My Efficient Electric Home, which is now at 35,000 members. So that's the figure we had recently. And with that milestone, we thought we'd even put out a media release. So this is a fantastic way for people to get some assistance, some information about how to improve their homes, how to get off gas, how to save money. And probably everybody here tonight is already a member, but if you're not, if you do Facebook, and if you're not a member, feel free to join. I call it Australia's largest continuously updated database of home improvement information, because it is a searchable database. If you know how to use the search function, you can go back and find posts that were put up 6 years ago. That's how long the group has been going. So it's quite a lot of fun. And there's six other admins there. A couple names Renew people would probably recognize: Katie Daly and Richard Keach. And we also have Talina, Simon, Allison, and Alessandra. So we've got a team of 7 admins there making sure that things stay on track. There's a couple of testimonials there I've got on this slide, and that was also what we had in the media release yesterday. And one of those, I'll just read one of those. It says, from Jackie, she says, we used our reverse cycle air conditioner this winter in Canberra, worked great, on track to save $1,100. So Jackie would have formerly been on gas heating, and she switched over to the reverse cycle air conditioner, and you can see the sort of money that can be saved. So reverse cycle air conditioners are fantastic. Sure, you can use them for cooling, but you can also use them for heating in winter. And the point I made before is that using these heat pump devices, it's another way to harvest renewable energy. So on this slide, I've shown 3 ways to harvest renewable energy. One people are really, really familiar with, that's the solar panels on the roof. So those collect the photons and turn sunlight into electricity, which is fantastic. But we can also do some other things with the sun using the heat pumps. So the sun heats our air, and these heat pumps use a refrigerant system to be able to extract heat from that air and to pump the heat up to temperatures warm enough to heat our water or heat our lounge rooms. So it's these are 3 different ways to use renewable energy. So perhaps you don't have a good roof, or maybe you don't have a roof at all, and you're thinking, gee, I can't use renewable energy, I don't have a roof. Well, you don't even need a roof to use a heat pump. They're able to suck heat out of the air regardless of where you install them, outside, on a roof or on by the wall, doesn't matter. So it's getting that message across that this is actually another form of tapping into renewable energy. And for some homes, it's the biggest way that some homes use renewable energy. And then, of course, with these heat pumps, you do need some electricity to drive the compressor that is the heat pump. But if you're able to do that during sunlight hours, or maybe even after sunlight hours if you've got a battery, but to be able to run these devices with your own electricity that you generated on your rooftop with your solar panels, well, this is an excellent combination. And this way you can provide the cheapest heat and the cheapest hot water. So some of the work I did on this dates back a few years to research that we published out of the University of Melbourne. And we found just how much money people could save by heating with their reverse cycle air conditioners. So every year there's more and more reverse cycle air conditioners in homes across Australia, but people tend to only use them for cooling. So they need to understand that there is a heat button there. So find that heat button. And we're almost out of the heating season now this season. But no, we do have a big storm coming from the south. So if you've never used your reverse cycle air conditioner for heating, as this big storm comes up now, go find that remote control. It might take you a few days to find the remote control. So since last summer, so find the heat button and use your air cons for heating, because this can be the cheapest way to heat, far cheaper than heating with gas. And in fact, all the gas that we're burning in homes these days across Australia, it's all essentially economically wasted, because starting from a few years ago, with these heat pumps, we now have cheaper options than burning gas, and gas keeps getting more expensive all the time. So really any gas that's being burned in homes is an economic waste. So we should stop doing that. Sure, there can be a transition. Maybe you don't have a reverse cycle air conditioner yet, or maybe your hot water service is practically brand new and maybe you think you shouldn't be switching it over just yet to a heat pump. But so there'll be a bit of a transition, but the faster we can get off gas, the faster we can start saving money and also reducing the use of that fossil fuel. So here's a story that I published in Renew magazine. Of course, we did the research at Melbourne Uni and found how much money could be saved, but I better do it in my own home then. So that's what we did a few years ago. It's an old weatherboard here in Sandringham. It had the ducted gas heating that went in about 1995. And we relied on that since, until a few years ago, we finally decided we could use some summer cooling. And we put the one air conditioner at either end of the house, but with the mind that we would use it for heating as well. And that's what we found we could do. So 2 split system reverse cycle air conditioners, one at either end of the house, is adequate to heat this house. We were able to get rid of the ducted gas heating, which was old anyway. And I did some calculations, worked out that we are able to heat the house with the air cons at about 1/3 the cost of gas heating. So this is tremendous. I mean, all the time we're talking about how the average Australian home has trouble with the budget. Well, here we can suddenly cut their gas heating bill to their heating bill to 1/3 of what it used to be. And so why isn't this great information, this news story, more widely publicized? So tell everybody about it. Heat with your air con, it's the cheapest way to go. But how do they really work? How do these heat pumps work? So it is confusing for people, and it's one of the things that holds us back. But there's a refrigerant cycle in there, just like your refrigerator. And at one point in the cycle, in the winter, the refrigerant gets to like -30 degrees and goes outside, where air is blown over the outside unit of your air con, and that warms up the refrigerant. So instead of now being -30 degrees, the refrigerant's a bit warmer. The refrigerant goes through a compressor, which then makes it really hot, and it comes inside to the inside unit, where another fan blows the heat off of that refrigerant into your lounge room. And then the refrigerant goes back out and does it again. So in a sense, it's like a water pump. You use a water pump to pump water uphill. And here these refrigerant devices are able to pump heat sort of uphill from a place outside your house where it might be cold, but there's still heat in the air, and outside it's not -30 degrees. So there's plenty enough heat in that air to heat that cold refrigerant. And then the compressor pumps the heat uphill to 40 degrees or something inside with the inside unit. So when the air blows across the heat exchanger inside, it's enough to warm up your house. And as I said before, that free renewable heat, where'd it come from? Really, it came from the sun. It's the sun that heats our air. Now, some people call this electric heating. I call them heat pumps because here's another form of electric heating, which are these cheaper electric heaters that basically they're like a toaster, And what you do is you put electricity through these, and 1 unit of electricity going into these electric heaters, you get 1 unit of heat coming out. And that sounds pretty efficient. It's 100% efficient. But the thing is, with the heat pumps, they can be 500% efficient, because for every 1 unit of electricity you put into them, you can get a great multiple of that amount of heat coming out. So you could say they're 500% efficient. So this is a key way to heat a house, a way to get a house off of gas and to save money. This chart, I don't show many charts tonight, but this one you may recognize if you're familiar with the book pulled together, Energy Freedom Home. That was a book pulled together by Richard Keach for Beyond Zero Emissions. And there's some case studies in there. This was Richard's house from Essendon. And you can show a progression here. You can see the progression of Richard's house from 2006 to a few years later. In 2006, Richard's house was using gas and electricity. The amount of energy that they were buying in the form of gas is shown in the red, and the amount of electricity they were buying, the energy they were buying in the form of electricity is shown in the blue. So in 2006, quite a lot of energy being purchased. So over time, Richard was able to get his house completely off of gas. And you see, one interesting thing is that the use of electricity doesn't even go up very much. So Richard would have been making other improvements across his house, probably improving insulation, reducing drafts with some draft proofing, maybe got a better refrigerator, a more efficient television. All those things add up. And so if you do all those things, you might find that you can get your house off gas, heat it, be comfortable, and your electricity use doesn't even go up that much. And this chart doesn't show the impact of Richard's solar PV system. So of course, if you can get the solar PV happening on your roof, you might find you can make your net electricity use totally disappear, and your net energy bill totally disappear as well. So that's how you can get your houses off of gas. And I described how you do that for heating, and you can also do that for your hot water. So here's a hot water heat pump. Again, it's basically a reverse cycle air conditioner. It's not going to do anything for your lounge room. All it's doing is heating up the water in the tank that you see there. And again, it uses that leveraging effect where you put 1 unit of electricity into the thing, and you can get 4.5 parts of hot water coming out of it, with those suddenly magical extra 3.5 parts of heat. Where did they come from? They came out of the thin air outside your house. And with these hot water heat pumps, you can even get renewable energy credits, maybe as much as $1,000 off for if you buy a hot water heat pump, because the Australian government recognizes this is renewable energy, and so you get some credit for that. And more recently, even for the air conditioners for heating your house, the Victorian government's started to offer $1,000 rebates in some cases for people buying air conditioners that replace, say, an old dodgy gas heater or a less efficient electric heater. So that's what's possible. That's what the members of the Facebook group are doing. I'm sure that's what a lot of the sustainable houses that we'll see will not be using gas anymore. And so the word is getting around. Renew has obviously published information in this space, as has Choice Magazine. And as I said, the Victorian government's even coming on board, talking about planning for the electric home. And this was a surprising one, AGL. So you would have heard of AGL. They sell electricity, but they also sell a lot of gas. But if you dig deep into some of their web pages, you'll find they're saying that you shouldn't buy any gas, because you and the world would be better off if you didn't. So here we have even a major retailer, AGL, saying, get your home off gas. And so people are doing it. We're collecting a gallery of these images of where the gas meter used to be. At our house, we finally got around to doing the kitchen renovation. And so that was the end of the gas cooktop, and the induction cooktop went in, and we just had our gas meter taken away recently. I rang up Power Shop, said, let's abolish this thing. And they organized for it to disappear. And it cost me $69.13. So that can be the cost for having a gas meter taken away. Because your garden will look much nicer if you plant a shrubbery there where you used to have the gas meter. So that talks a bit about efficient heating, low cost heating. Oh, I didn't mention, in our old weatherboard house here with those 2 air cons, our whole heating and cooling bill is less than $200 a year. I go into houses as a home energy advisor, and I go into houses and people are spending $10, $15, $20, $30 a day on gas for heating. So homes like that, in 10 days, they're spending more for heating than what our house would use all year. And it's just an old weatherboard. Sure, some bits of it have been improved, but it really is key having those efficient air conditioners for heating and cooling. But it is really important to talk about the thermal envelope of the home, because there's no point putting heat of any source into a home, whether that's from gas or from a reverse cycle, just to see it immediately leak away. So our homes are leaky buckets. Credit Richard Keach for using this analogy. We put heat in and it's immediately starting to leak out. So in efficient homes, it won't leak out quite as quickly, but in leaky homes, it disappears very fast. So what are the different methods for trying to keep that heat in our homes in the wintertime? Insulation is important. And we've had programs for having insulation installed in roof spaces. So we find a lot of homes with insulation in the roof spaces, but quite often it's been disrupted or it was never installed properly in the first place. So if anyone's been in your roof space in the last few years to run the NBN wire or to change out those halogen lights or to fix a fan or do practically anything up there, they will have moved the insulation around and they probably didn't put it back. So I really recommend to folks, if it's safe to do so, have a look in your roof space, see what's up there, or get someone to have a look. But be careful of electrical hazards when you're going into spaces like the roof space. And that's just the roof. Of course, it's also possible to retrofit insulation to walls and underfloors, you see happening here. And I say to folks who may have just bought an older home, they're like, should we bother to get these things? And I'm like, well, if you bought a new home, even if it had only been built to the bare minimum legal standard, 6 stars, it would have insulation in the walls and in the floor. So why should you not have that in the home that you just bought? Why shouldn't you be comfortable as well and have lower energy bills? Yes, you'll be up for some thousands of dollars to fully insulate under your floor or the walls, but that's what you'd have if you had a modern home. And so any sort of improvements of your thermal envelope like this certainly make it easier for any heating system to keep you comfortable. And then draft proofing is another key one. This is usually the #1 priority for all the homes I visit, because we've made a habit of just chopping holes through plaster for a dozen different reasons, whether it's those old wall vents or the halogen downlights or fans and just vents all through the house. Those things can be closed up and moisture can be managed in other ways. It's a bit of a big topic on its own, but we do lose just so much heat from leaky homes. You see in action down there a blower door test, and homes can be tested where they leak as many as where they have like 60 air changes per hour under the test conditions, which simulates a windy day. So on a windy day, basically every minute, all the air is being swept out of a house. So how are you meant to have low energy bills or be comfortable in that situation? But yes, while you're eliminating uncontrolled air leakage, we do also need to think about ventilation and what's happening with moisture. Maybe we'll talk about some of this in the Q&A, but it's also important to understand what's happening with moisture in your home. And by all means, use windows to provide ventilation when the weather is appropriate. Other bits around the thermal envelope of the home: interior window coverings, so heavy thermal drapes with pelmets, honeycomb blinds, cellular blinds, or even some of the cheaper things like, should you be in a rental or perhaps kids' rooms or whatever, you can even use something as simple as bubble wrap to basically give you double glazed windows, because our Australian climate zones aren't that severe, and practically anything we do to the windows is nearly enough and can give you a big improvement in comfort and reduce the energy bills. And while you're electrifying your home, of course, it pays to be able to monitor the electricity use so there's no surprises. In the old days, we'd get a bill every 3 months, but now you can look at your electricity instantaneously, or at the worst, you can look at 30-minute blocks a day later, such as you see from the PowerShop heat map there. So there should be no surprises as to what electricity you're using. I was in a client's home recently where they had the option of either heating with their reverse cycle air conditioner or some electric panels they'd mounted on the wall. And using this device called the PowerPal, which gives you instantaneous feedback on your electricity use, we were able to turn things on, shut things off, and they could very quickly see the difference that the different equipment has on their electricity use. And one last thing is just look after your equipment. So anything that blows air around, whether it's the ducted gas heating or a reverse cycle air conditioner, should have an air filter, not only to keep you, the air you breathe a bit cleaner, but also to protect the equipment. So you should have a filter. If you don't, someone has taken it out and thrown it away. So you need to get a filter, and then you need to check it regularly. So all too often I go into clients' homes and they say, yeah, I'd like to heat with the air conditioner, but it doesn't work. So I guess I have to get a new air conditioner. And then we just, well, they're not aware there's filters. And so you find that the filter hasn't been cleaned in 10 years. So that's something to understand. Read the owner's manuals with any equipment and to do the appropriate maintenance actions. So that's it for me for now. I'm happy to do a lot of Q&A later, but winter's almost over. But I guess winter is officially over. We may still have some cold days. Try heating with your aircon, and certainly by next winter, if you could get in a position to do more of that, you'll save some money. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Tim. And I can see we are having a lot of questions. Of course, we'll cover that in the Q&A session in the end. For now, I'll present to you the next speaker. So Belinda Allwood will be presenting on cooling in the tropics. Belinda is an architect, a landscape architect, maker, and researcher. She's a Queensland Chapter Councillor for the Australian Institute of Architects, RAIA, and sits on the RAIA Queensland Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Belinda is a registered architect in Queensland, the Northern Territory, and New South Wales. Her rare combination of skills brings architecture and landscape architecture together to create places that respond sustainably to place and connect people with nature. Belinda has written papers and presented to audiences nationally and internationally on the topics of sustainable design, regional practice, intercultural design, and placemaking. She's well known for her comprehensive construction knowledge and experience in all phases of project delivery on a wide range of project types for government departments, not-for-profit organizations, and private clients. With this, I'll hand over the screen to Belinda now.
Thank you, AJ. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'd like to start by extending a huge thank you to Renew for organising Sustainable House Day for the 5th year running, I believe, and for the brilliant treasure trove of events that run for the whole month leading up to Sustainable House Day. I'm as AJ said, I'm an architect and a landscape architect. I'm also director of a Cairns-based practice called POD, which stands for People-Oriented Design. I'd like to acknowledge the Yidinji and Yuraganji people as the traditional owners of the land upon which I live and work here in Cairns, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This is our team at POD. We're a multidisciplinary practice. We're architects, and we also offer services that are complementary to architecture, which means we can offer integrated design solutions for our clients. So house, landscape, interior, project management, and so on. Shanine Fanton and I are both directors, and we are 3rd and 4th generation locals from far north Queensland. We have a deep connection to the people and landscapes of far north Queensland. And here's some of the places where we've worked over the last 25 years. We've worked in many regional cities and remote communities, mostly across Northern Australia, in the tropics and in the subtropics. As you can see, we've got a pretty big backyard for a firm that is based in Cairns. We seem to travel a lot for our work, and a lot of that's small planes. So I'm going to talk about some pretty broad aspects of sustainability, but my general focus will be on how we make houses cool and comfortable here in the tropics by reducing our reliance on energy for cooling. And much of what I cover about keeping cool in summer will be relevant to house design in subtropical areas also. Making cool houses in the tropics depends on having a clear understanding of these four things: the place we live in, and by this I mean our region. We need to understand the qualities of our natural and socio-cultural environment that we value, because they present opportunities to enrich the way we live. We need to understand the climate and any climate extremes or conditions that we may need to accommodate to make our homes comfortable and resilient. And again, at a larger scale, you can see a shift in scales here, large scale, we need to consider the opportunities and constraints of our suburb design and the planning schemes that relate to our areas. Finally, we need to be able to understand how to interpret all this information and translate it into sustainable, resilient, and comfortable design for our houses. And this is the science, and some may say art, of designing houses for the place, the climate, the town or suburb that we choose to live in. So, Cairns is in the wet tropics of far north Queensland. When you see this area in satellite image, you can see that we occupy a pretty thin, lush, fertile strip of coast, bordered on one side by the rainforested peaks of the Great Dividing Range, and on the other side by the Coral Sea and the Great Barrier Reef. If we travel 30 minutes by car to the west, the rainfall reduces and the landscape becomes quite arid very quickly. This is home, Cairns, or Gimoy in Yidin, the language of the Gimoy, Wallabara, Yidinji, the traditional owners of the Cairns area. Cairns has a population of 160,000 people, and people who live here value the lush, verdant environment, the relaxed outdoor lifestyle, and many opportunities for connection to nature. In fact, connection to nature and outdoor lifestyle are consistent priorities we find for our clients when we work with them on their house designs. Here are some of the aspects of our environment that we really value. We feel very lucky to live here, and within a very short drive of the city, we have tropical beaches, the Great Barrier Reef, rainforest and freshwater streams, waterfalls and swimming holes to cool off in. So beaches and waterfalls like this occur within 20 minutes drive of the city, and you can hike on rainforest trails a mere 10 minutes drive from the city centre, which is pretty fantastic, makes for a great lifestyle. Our natural environment informs our preferences for recreation and socialising. Outdoor dining, markets, swimming and bushwalks are favourites among locals and visitors. With such a beautiful local environment, people prefer to live with their houses open as much as possible, connecting to outdoors and letting breezes through. Cairns is also a multicultural place with a very rich history. In fact, we're a place with two histories, which is something that many people don't consider, although it's really pleasing to see this starting to change. The settlement history of Cairns is only 145 years old. We were settled or colonised in the 1870s, so much shorter time frame than many other places in the country. So the First Nations history of this place extends for millennia, and the traditional custodians here maintain continuous connection to country and culture, which is really lovely. You might ask how this is relevant to designing cool, sustainable houses. From my perspective, it is relevant because when we consider sustainability, we can learn much from the ways of knowing, being and doing of First Nations peoples. Environmental and social sustainability is embedded in First Nations philosophy and values. Consider the Western notion of owning land in contrast to the First Nation idea of belonging to the land, and the difference between asserting your rights over land and about recognising your obligations towards land in relation to the environment, community and future generations. So this may sound like a sidetrack conversation to cooling your house in the tropics, but to me it's also fundamental to explaining why we should practice sustainability and be good custodians of the places and country that we occupy. Let's talk about climate. So to design anywhere, tropics tropics or otherwise, we need to understand the weather. Here we're on the coast in Cairns and we get sea breezes throughout the year. We don't get the extreme temperatures experienced by many places south of here. The mean maximum temperature in Cairns is 31 to 32 degrees in summer, which when you live here and are acclimatised is actually not too bad. Summer is wet season and we get around 400 millimetres of rain per month in summer. In summer, our weather is characterised by temperatures between 23 to 32 degrees with approximately 3 hot days per month, temperatures greater than 33 degrees. And these are the days where many of us are thankful for having air conditioning on hand if we need it. But 3 days per month equates to only about 10% of the time during summer. Winter in Cairns is absolutely gorgeous. You could not ask for better. You could just about move outside and live under a tree. Some of you will have seen one of these before. It's a sun path diagram. And for us as designers, it's a really helpful tool to get hold of for the area that you live because it shows where the sun will be in the sky throughout the year, any time of day. So I'll use my pointer here. You can see this is the sun path diagram for Cairns, and it shows this is in summer where the sun rises, middle of the day, and then where the sun sets in relation to west. So it's south of west. And then this is the other solstice in winter where the sun rises in the morning and sets in the afternoon. So in the tropics, for us, it's really important to understand because we're north of the Tropic of Capricorn, and you can see that illustrated here. That's the center of the circle straight up. The sun path actually tracks to the south for us, which means we need to protect the southern walls and windows of our houses from direct summer sun. So if you live south of Rockhampton, you don't have to deal with that. Climate challenges. High rainfall causes humidity. We're also at risk from tropical cyclones in summer and autumn. So generally around Christmas time through to May, sometimes we've had cyclones in the past. So we need to design our houses to ensure they are safe and watertight in very high winds as well. High humidity and temperature means we need to manage condensation, particularly around air-conditioned spaces. And it's interesting to hear Tim talking about that in cooler climates too. We need to select materials carefully to last in the high humidity and high rainfall. Living in the wet tropics is like living in a giant compost heap, and many materials such as straw bale or adobe are just not suitable to build with here. Insulation here needs to be installed with a vapor barrier on the outside. Otherwise, condensation becomes trapped in the insulation blanket and can cause long-term damage to structures. So in this image here, you can see this is the way blanket insulation is frequently installed, and it's suitable for non-tropical, not wet tropical climates. But in the tropics, if you do this, you get the condensation forming under the roof, particularly if you've got air-conditioned spaces below. And this traps the moisture and can cause long-term damage. We also designed ventilation cavities for materials so they can breathe. Many manufacturers have got installation instructions for cladding that call for gaps to manage condensation. So typically wall cladding would have a spacer and then a sarking layer and then the framing behind that. And that allows condensation that forms inside the cladding can get out. It's not going to rot the structure. Right, still at large scale, let's start talking about suburbs and suburb design. This is a couple of shots of the Cairns area, the northern beaches of Cairns area, and you can see the change between 2002 to 2018. So we've seen densification in suburbs all over the country in the past 3 decades since the 1990s. That's when it really started to shift. The drivers for this include land availability and housing affordability. And while there are a few good examples of new suburb development in some of the larger cities, these new suburbs are seldom done very well in regional Australia, sadly. And in Cairns, we're losing our green spaces rapidly. I think we've got a particular set of environmental circumstances up here in Cairns that means we require an urgent conversation about the way we develop new suburbs. If you go to the ABS and look at the statistics for the last 15 years, the site area for houses nationally in Australia has decreased by 22%, down from 602 square metres in 2005 to 460 square metres in 2020. That's the average Australia-wide. Yet, in that same time period, there's been an increase in floor area of houses. The average floor area of houses in 2020 in Australia was 248 square metres. By comparison, the average floor area of detached houses in the United States in the same year, 2020, was 210 square metres. That's a massive difference. There's no real reason for this to be so, but you just got to jump on Google, like these images here, in any city in Australia to see the same dense suburbs where houses are built to the absolute side and rear setbacks with no room for yards. There's nowhere for kids to play outdoors, nowhere, you can't plant a tree, food production. I'm sure many of you have heard this conversation before. So here in Cairns, when you look at these images, the effect is essentially the desertification of the wet tropics in our urban areas due to the loss of landscapes, the loss of backyards, loss of public green space. And such a shift has undeniable social effects, but it also contributes to environmental impacts with loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat, changing microclimates, more heat, loss of shade, and the fact that stormwater is no longer replenishing our groundwater. It's the loss of green space in both the public and private realm that is of great concern to me. And as architects, we encourage people to really question what they actually need to be comfortable in the tropics. So this is about house size. Smaller houses to us make more sense. The less closed internal space you build, the more yard and garden you have, the less cleaning and maintenance there is, and the more connection you can have with the outdoors. And then the less reliant you are on air conditioning. This is a zoom in of that same area in the northern beaches. You can see the typical pattern of development that has occurred, and these, like elsewhere in Australia, are small lots with really large houses and little or no backyard space. The small lot, big house formula seems to work pretty well for the building and development industry because it maximises yield and profit. But that formula doesn't necessarily meet people's needs or support community values or deliver the best outcomes for future generations. It's also, from a designer's perspective, impossible to get enough natural breeze to keep cooler in a house that is built right up against neighbours on three sides. So these types of houses are completely reliant on air conditioning in this climate. For most of the year, in fact. Sustainable house design is important, but for these houses to work sustainably, there needs to be more oversight on how new subdivisions are created. Introducing planning constraints to limit maximum lot coverage and minimum rear setbacks would help immensely. So as far as suburb design goes, I see a real need for change, and I think it's particularly urgent in a place like Cairns, given our relatively small amount of developable land between the mountains and the sea, and the fact that we've got such a rich environment, and our environmental and social values up here are so important. So that was my soapbox moment on suburb design. But for me, it's really important because it feeds so closely into sustainable house design and what's possible from our perspective as designers when we are presented with a lot to design for. And so to wrap that topic up, I'd like to recommend a book for people. It's been out since 2010. It's on the topic of backyards and suburb design, and its content to me is actually even more relevant now because lot sizes continued to decrease since this book was written and house sizes have increased. And for me, this book clearly outlines why we need green space in our suburbs. Again, locally here in Cairns, this is a great resource put out by the Cairns Regional Council. It's available online, so anybody from anywhere can download it. It's the Cool Homes Guide, and it's been out for 5 years or more up here. I've included a picture from this resource here on lot orientation. This is a really good, clear explanation of how to orient your house to best suit the climate. The green or good properties here are the ones with the long axis that faces east-west, which means the walls facing the hot morning and afternoon sun in the east and west are the shortest walls on the house. And if you spin the house 90 degrees the other way, like in the blue lots in that image, then you have more of your house, the long walls, soaking up hot afternoon sun. It's a really simple, clear diagram to explain the impact that lot orientation can have on how easy or difficult it is to build a comfortable, cool home. So let's change down in scale finally, and I'm probably going to start talking about the thing that you thought I was going to talk about this whole time, which is house design, how to keep houses cool here in the tropics, and how to reduce people's reliance on air conditioning. Typical houses built in Cairns, so those dense suburbs that I showed you before, so post-1980s, are generally not particularly well designed for this climate, project homes. These project homes could be anywhere in Australia. They generally have poor natural ventilation, little shade, and they are reliant on air conditioning for much of the year to keep temperatures comfortable. As architects, we prefer to design free-running homes that allow people to connect with outdoor spaces and live comfortably without air conditioning for most of the year. And the houses we design incorporate deep shade, great cross ventilation, and a well-insulated building fabric. And while many of our houses will still have some air conditioning available for those few extreme temperature days, those 3 days a month that I spoke about, the houses are not reliant on it. Additionally, we have a core philosophy, which we call the least house necessary, where we challenge people's belief about how much enclosed space they need to live comfortably. And this is going back to that average floor area of houses in Australia of 248 square metres in 2020, as a reminder. So apart from floor area, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to present a few case studies at the end of this, but I'll move on to some of the other aspects of how to design to keep your house cool. So apart from providing plenty of shade and insulation, the key to running a free running house up here in the wet tropics is air movement. We aim to maximise natural ventilation, and we use a lot of ceiling fans in indoor spaces and outdoor areas as well, so on decks. Air movement is key to occupant comfort. If we can maintain 1 metre per second of air velocity, it makes the temperature feel 3 degrees lower. And on days where humidity is high, say above 75%, it makes the temperature feel 2 degrees lower if you've got the 1 metre per second of air velocity. This makes a huge difference, and it helps reduce the need for air conditioning. So to recap and summarise some of the key ways to design a free running house here in the tropics, here's some of the things you need to consider. The orientation, having a narrow floor plan, which I'll show you in a case study shortly, having large openings to maximise cross ventilation. Louvers are great. They have 100% openable area. And up here, when we're in the summer monsoon wet season, louvers are controllable. You can still keep them open and it keeps rain out. Whereas if you have sliding glass windows and you have even the remotest bit of wind, rain comes in, you've got to shut windows. So louvers are great value. We like to incorporate high level windows where we can in spaces, so you get thermal venting, and you can see that here. This house cross section is 2-storey with a void, so air heats up and is drawn out at high level. Ceiling fans, insulation in roof and wall spaces, and also having deep shade, so generous eaves and deck areas, or in this particular house, this is a terrace, outdoor terrace area that's shaded, provided shade. But the other thing, and I often come back to this because I'm a landscape architect too, is don't underestimate the value of shade from landscape. Planting trees, it can reduce the temperature in your house by a couple of degrees. It's quite noticeable. So back on the topic of insulation, we need to consider the type. It's our value, so how effective, how much it insulates, and where we use it. Where we use an air-conditioned spaces in this climate, it's really good practice to put insulation in ceilings as well as under the roof sheet. And this is because we don't need to insulate, we don't need our air conditioners to cool our roof spaces. Using light colours on the roof and walls of your home helps to reflect heat. High R-value insulation and light coloured roof and walls make a huge difference to the temperature of your home. And ventilating the roof space can also help let out hot air. So here's a first case study, and this is a new house built a few years ago. It's an example of how we've incorporated these key design principles in a new house build. Our Gavin Street house was built on a steep site with really poor climate orientation. The long axis faced north-south, so it was completely the wrong way from that diagram I showed you earlier. But this steep site on a hill had absolutely gorgeous expansive views, and it captured great breezes. We came up with a very narrow floor plan. So that's something I mentioned a couple of slides ago. Having a narrow floor plan helps to capture breezes and bring them through. Whereas if you have a deep floor plan, then breezes get a bit blocked when you've got stacks of rooms. Verandas, front and back, provide deep shade, and for this house that was particularly important because again you've got the long sides facing east and west, so we really wanted to stretch out those eaves and put verandas on those sides to help protect the house from the sun. All areas of this house enjoy 180-degree views through the treetops to the Coral Sea. The inside and outside areas connect pretty seamlessly with large covered breezeway that separates the living and the bedroom pavilions of the house. One of the things, though, that we're most pleased about with this house is it has a gross floor area of 215 metres squared, but only 98 metres squared of that is fully enclosed. And it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. Yet this house feels generous. It's got high ceilings, it's got great connection to outdoors. The other thing about it, because it was a small footprint, it was very affordable to build. Now I've got a couple of case studies of renovations or retrofits that we've done in recent years in Cairns. So these two houses, this one, Edge Hill House, is 1960s vintage. It started its life as a government house. Brick veneer, red brick veneer. The owners came to us because they loved the original red brick, which is not common in Cairns. In fact, we don't use brick anymore because it's very hard to tie down for cyclonic winds. One of the nice things about this house was the fact that it was an old block in an inner suburb. It had a huge yard and established trees, and the owners loved that. But the house was designed really poorly for climate. This slide here shows how it looked before we renovated the house. It was quite pokey feeling and very hot and uncomfortable to live in. It was poorly oriented, and many of the habitable rooms just got too much hot afternoon sun. And the house didn't capture the breezes from the south, from the backyard. It didn't have any outdoor covered shaded areas, and the house just didn't connect with the backyard at all. It was completely disconnected, which was a real wasted opportunity. So in renovation, some of the things we did was look to open up the house a lot more to get breezes through. As we removed material, we saved some bricks and recycled them and other materials. We increased natural ventilation. Here is a high level ventilation into bathroom with timber slats and also breeze blocks. We put in roof insulation, and with this big opening, we connected to outdoor, the backyard. And the finished result of that, there it is there. The other thing we did, which you can see in the floor plan here, is reconfiguring the spaces. So we tipped the bedrooms out to the north. We opened up the living area via an expansive back deck out to the backyard. And we also took the wet areas out and put them off to the side of the house in a kind of going back to an old-fashioned notion of having wet areas off a breezeway, almost as an outhouse, but it actually works very well in this climate because we don't get too cold. So laundry, bathroom and toilet are off this securable breezeway, which also draws breezes through and into the house. This is my last case study, another renovation. This Whitfield House was also 1960s vintage, red brick veneer construction. It had an almost flat roof with a ceiling lined directly under the roof battens. The house faced due west and there was no roof or wall insulation. Living areas were cut off from the backyard with this enclosed shed area, and breezes were just completely blocked off. The house was pokey and it was a hot box. When I first visited it, the woman living there had a toddler, and they found the most comfortable place in the whole house to sit was by the rear garage door, where they could get a cool breeze. The rest of the house was just about uninhabitable in the summer months. So we did a similar thing with this place, but we went a step further and we pulled the old roof off and put a new roof on, fully insulated. We used scissor trusses so we could get high ceilings inside to help make the spaces feel more generous. We also aimed to minimise the new area that we built on, instead focusing on making the existing spaces work more efficiently. We converted the old garage into a master suite, and we built a new garage on the front of the house. We reconfigured the living and kitchen areas to make the house feel more open and large. We designed a landscaped front private yard with shade trees, which will take some years to grow, but when they do mature, they will help to protect the house from that western setting sun. So both these houses, these renovated houses, began with houses that achieved the equivalent of 1 to 2 star energy rating. And on completion, they delivered more than 8-star energy ratings. Both houses were both extensively renovated 5 to 6 years ago at a cost of around $200,000 for the Edge Hill house and a bit more than that for the Whitfield house with its new roof as well. For the owners of both of these houses, this investment was worth it. They have extended the life of 50-year-plus old houses, which are located on generous, large blocks of land in established suburbs close to the city. These houses are now comfortable, cool, low energy, sustainable houses. They have great connection to outdoor living spaces. And the total investment for each of these houses is more than buying a new project home on a small lot in a new outer suburb, but the quality of life and comfort offered by these renovated properties is far greater, as is their value as an investment because of their location, the size of their yards and the quality of living that they now offer. And that concludes my presentation on cooling houses in the tropics. A bit of a wild journey around a lot of different topics, but we ended up about cooling houses in the tropics. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. So now that the presentations are over, I would like to invite 2 other panelists who are also homeowners who will be joining us. So the first one is Carlos Acuna. His house is Western Australia's first passive house plus. This home was designed by the owners and built to passive house plus standards by iSmart. Having lived in North America for many years, Carlos and Gloria were familiar with high energy efficiency construction standards, such as air tightness, high levels of insulation, and double glazed windows. Carlos and Gloria were able to build an owner-designed, high-performing passive house plus home for a comparable status quo double brick price, a moderate budget, short timeline, pre-manufactured timber frame structure for a final all-in cost of $2,080 per square meter. You can take a look at their house profile on sustainablehouseday.com/listing/Acuna-house. And I would also like to invite on the panel now, Tony Lawson. His home is called as Tropical Pavilions. Tropical Pavilions was designed as a series of pods to maximize their potential use now and in the future. Site conditions are a tropical climate with potential cyclones, so durability and strength are a priority. They opted for a small footprint and adjustable walls to minimize materials use and utilize maximum natural light and ventilation in a passive solar design. Timber was the main material used for its low carbon footprint and availability from local mills. Corrugated steel roofing was used for cyclonic strength and was insulated with an R1.4 blanket backed up with Solomid compressed straw ceiling panels. Walls were also insulated with reflective foil and bats. Living without AC in the tropics requires an open building with cross-floor ventilation and ceiling fans. Due to minimum services, a home sewage plant was used and all water was collected in tanks. So I welcome you both, Carlos and Tony. And we will now move towards our Q&A session. I think we have had like 59 questions, so we'll have to skip some. Oh, sorry, by the way, you can see Tony's house at sustainablehouseday.com/listing/tropical-pavilions. So let me begin with the Q&A. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll try to segregate the questions into different groups. I'll start with heat pump hot waters initially. So there's this one particular question, and I think a lot of people want to know about this also. So Ashley over here, she has got a standing heat pump for a hot water, and she's got solar panels also. And she's wondering if she can add a small hydronic heating system to it, either to the hot water storage tank or maybe its own hot water storage tank, but connected to the same condenser unit. So I think Tim would be the right person for this.
There are a couple places I know of where like some enthusiasts have taken like 3 stand-ins and put them together to be heat pump hydronic space heating. But I don't think Sandon will give you a warranty for doing that. And that's because for space heating, you'd be running the heat pumps for more hours a day than you would just to heat your water. And so Sandon doesn't see the need to get into that market. So they don't allow that sort of thing from a point of view of their warranties. But of course, there are heat pumps that you can get to heat your whole house with a hydronic system if you want to. So again, rather than burning gas, you can extract heat from the air and heat your house that way. But that said, Renew magazine, a Sustainable House Day I went to not too long ago, Cameron Munro, I visited his house, and then he put an article in Renew magazine. He had installed heat pump hydronic underfloor in his house. And as he renovated the back of his house, and the back of the house had a really good thermal envelope. And then he did an interesting thing. He also put an air conditioner in the place for summer cooling. And what he found is he didn't need to spend the $40,000 or $50,000 on the heat pump hydronic, because if you've got a good thermal envelope, even in the Melbourne climate, you can easily heat it just with a reverse cycle air conditioner. So a lot of people do ask questions about hydronic. They think in the colder climates, they need hydronic. They want hydronic because they felt it in somebody else's house and it was really nice. You could sit right on the radiator and you were warm. But I think what we're really shooting for here is to have a thermal envelope of a home that is good enough that really all it takes to comfortably heat the place is just to have an air conditioner ticking over somewhere.
Right. Thanks for that. I just want to add along with this question because, just so that if there's anyone who's confused, someone asked if you can use heat pumps for hydronic heating for both heating and cooling.
There are some vendors that say they can do some cooling using hydronic, and so that means you have to make the water cold. So for hydronic heating, you're making the water that circulates around hot, but for summer you'd want to make it cold. And so you can try to do that and get a bit of cooling, whether that'll be through radiators or underfloor. But there are limits to what you can do, because if it's like a cold beer glass, you can get condensation, and so your floors will get slippery, or you'll have water running down your radiators. So at the same time, you're trying that thing, you pretty much need an air conditioner anyway to dehumidify.
Right. And sorry, I'll just add one more to this. So someone asked, between heat pump hydronic heating versus reverse cycle air conditioners, which one do you say are better and why?
Yeah, again, just Google Cameron Munro, Renew magazine, heat pump versus hydronic versus aircon, and read all about it and how you can save $40,000.
Right, thank you. I'll ask the next one to Belinda. So someone specifically has this question for you, Belinda. They're saying, in the tropics, like the Gavin Street house, how do you manage insects? Do you have selective openings that are screened or screens to openings closer to vegetation and the ground?
So in all houses we design, we do put insect screens. So insects can be a problem up here. Mosquitoes in summer because of the wet season, but other times of the year also you can get kind of just mass insect occurrences on a single evening, sort of thing, like flying ants will happen and they're en masse. So you do need insect screens. All window and door openings, generally speaking, and that tends to deal with it. And for those nights where you get those onslaught of insects, you don't have your dinner out on those breezeways or outdoor decks. You come back inside, leave your doors and windows still open, and your insect screens save you.
Right. Thank you. Another question I want to choose is from heat pump again. So can the heat pump hot water systems provide you instant hot water, and how do you basically size it? Do you oversize it, or some people talk about recovery rate? So how do you define all those parameters someone should look for while sizing also?
One thing folks can do, if you Google my name and Renew's YouTube channel, we put a couple of videos up there. Heat pumps part 1, that's about hot water. Heat pumps part 2 is about space heating. And so in that first presentation that I did at Melbourne Uni that was recorded and it's on the Renew YouTube channel, we go through that a bit. Do you have instant hot water? Sure, you've got a tank of hot water sitting there. So you turn on the tap and as quickly as you can get hot water to flow through the lines to your shower or kitchen, you'll have hot water because it's a tank full of hot water. But a lot of people do run their hot water heat pumps on a timer so that they activate in the middle of the day, so that you're generating electricity on your solar panels, you use that electricity to run the heat pump. And so in that situation, you might want a bigger water tank to make sure you'll get through the 24-hour cycle to the next day, even when you have visitors or maybe you decided to take 2 or 3 showers that day. But of course, you can always deactivate these timers as well. And then the heat pump will, as soon as it senses cold water coming in, it will activate and start to reheat the water.
Right, thanks. I actually want to ask our other panelists, homeowners, Tony and Carlos. So what kind of hot water system, as well as heating and cooling systems, do you guys have in your homes?
On the house that we did with Tropical Pavilions, it was a solar hot water system, but it was a house that was probably designed 12 or 13 years ago. So there's been a lot of improvements since then.
Right. What about heating and cooling?
No heating required, and there was no air conditioning on this particular house. It was a total exercise in no air conditioning, so we relied on lightweight construction, big overhangs, insulation in the roofs, but more to the point, we had a special site where we could extract cool air from the surrounding rainforest and creek and pull it through the house. So even though a lot of people have fans that push air down, sometimes they work better when you actually put them on a reverse cycle so that you can create a Venturi effect through the house and then expel the hot air through high windows. We find that works well too.
Right, thanks. How about you, Carlos?
Yeah, so our passive house is fully electric, and so we do have a stable Eltron heat pump for water heating, and we have 2 AC units in the house, 2.5 kilowatts each, so 5 kilowatts of cooling power for a 220 square meter home, which is pretty good.
Right. Thanks. Okay, I'll ask another question to Belinda. So where do you get breeze blocks from these days? They were abundant in the 60s and 70s, a bit hard to find now.
Yeah, great question. So I quite enjoy walking around demolition yards, and very occasionally you can see old ones, great, but there used to be such a great range of patterns that was available. Sadly, no more, but there are still manufacturers of breeze blocks. You just got to search. We find not generally locally available here, but you can get them in. It's fun looking at some of the old designs, and I think there would certainly be a market for it if somebody decided to manufacture more designs again.
Right. Thanks. There is another question. I'm still on heat pumps at the moment. So there's another question about ground sourced versus air sourced heat pumps, and which one would you say are more feasible in Australia? So
yeah, this question comes a lot at up at the Facebook group, My Efficient Electric Home. And I grew up in North America, so certainly there's a lot of ground source heat pumps in colder climates, because the idea there, of course, is that the ground will have a more stable temperature throughout the year than the air will. But what we're finding in Australia is that air source heat pumps work just fine. So that's an ordinary reverse cycle air conditioner. It either extracts heat from the air in the winter, or it rejects heat back out into the air in the summertime. So for Australian climates, that's fine. It's going to be a lot cheaper, and it's going to be a lot lower risk. Because once you start putting pipes in the ground, like for ground source, you have to hope that it all works properly. Of course, no leaks, that sort of thing. And also that you do get the heat transfer in the soil that you're hoping for. And that can vary with the amount of moisture in the soil, the water table, etc. So there are some risks once you start digging in the ground. Might as well make it easy on yourself and just use air source.
Right. And so about the compressor, be it for hot water heat pump or the reverse cycle air conditioner, is there any tips that you want to share about how do you locate that compressor unit? Some people worry about, can I put it inside in a cupboard or in a garage?
Yeah, for hot water units, if you are in a freezing place like in North America, they will put hot water heat pumps inside the house, the whole compressor and everything, the heat exchangers, etc., or in a garage but basically it will be sucking heat out of that area, so it'll freeze your garage a bit or make it colder, and it could impact the efficiency somewhat, having your device that is meant to be extracting heat from the air, having it somewhat constrained in a building. But as I say, like for hot water, it can be done. That's just a few hours a day that's going to run. A key siting criteria for Victoria for air conditioners for winter is that you make sure that it does have access to enough air so it can extract heat out of the air. And that can be particularly important on the coldest winter day, where it is possible that you can get frosting or icing on a reverse cycle air conditioner. And the better access you have to air, the less likely that's going to happen.
Right. Thank you. So I'll switch the question to space heating now. So there's this one question. There are two air cons at the either ends of the house. So what is the best way to distribute the heat, or for cooling evenly throughout the house? So if anyone in the panel wants to answer.
Carlos, you've got a couple air cons.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So someone has got two air cons, but they are situated at either ends of their house, and they want to know what's the best way to distribute. If you're trying to heat, or if you're trying to cool, how do you distribute that evenly in your house?
Yeah, I think so the thing in my particular case, the my passive house only has 2 units, one downstairs and one upstairs, because I have a also mechanical ventilation system that helps circulate air throughout the house. If you didn't have some kind of mechanical ventilation, then you're going to have a very cold space where your aircon is, and that cool or heat will radiate outwards, if you will, but you'll still have potentially a gradient across. So it really depends on the geometry, the volumes of how the house is designed. It's hard to answer. I think maybe they asked that question because, Tim, you were mentioning that in your house you're now running air cons on both ends of the house, and I don't know if you've had that similar experience.
Yeah. I'll maybe give a bit of a longer answer here. And the one thing when Belinda was presenting, I totally agree with everything Belinda said. I mean, I'm an engineer, not an architect, and I've never lived in the tropics, so totally agree with everything she said. But it was interesting how Belinda was saying, designed so that you don't have to use air conditioning, and that's great. And similarly here in Victoria, to the extent a house never has to use the air conditioner in the summer, that's great, go for that. But what we've really done, and particularly in places like Victoria, is we've really demonized the use of air conditioners. It's like, only use the thing if you're about ready to go to the emergency room in the hospital on a hot day. And the gas industry loves this, because if people think that air conditioners are the devil or very, very expensive to run, then that's why they don't use them, and they'll just keep turning on the gas. So we have a real education down here in the southern locations to tell people, yeah, don't run your air conditioner in the summer if you can avoid it, but in wintertime, yes, do use it, because you are going to need to heat the house, and it'll be cheaper than gas. So likewise, in terms of distributing heat around the house, I'll visit clients and they'll say, I tried the air conditioner, but it didn't really work. And of course, let's make sure the filter's clean, but then also give the thing a chance. So let it run for a while, like even put it on a timer, get it running at 5:30 in the morning before you even get out to the lounge room or whatever. Give it a chance. Don't be afraid to run it. Do monitor your electricity use. And when you look back, you'll see, actually, that was a lot cheaper to do that than to use gas. So with gas, you turn on a switch. Certainly, they're very powerful heating, and very quickly, you've got a lot of heat all over the place. You can accomplish the same thing, even with just 2 air conditioners in a house like we've done, if the thermal envelope's pretty good and if you give them a chance. Another option, there's also houses with 7 air conditioners. Or as I said, that Renew webinar, if you look at heat pumps part 2, I talk about a whole bunch of different configurations, ducted, not ducted, hybrids of all that, multi-head systems. There's a lot of different ways to do air conditioning. And particularly if you are building a new house or a major renovation, at an early stage, when you've got the floor plan, start talking to air conditioning people so that you can start to think about what sort of inside units you can have. Will they be up on the wall? Will they be floor standing? Will they be bulkheads? Will they be cassette units? There's lots of different options. And will it be ducted or not ducted? And how much equipment will there be inside and outside? And where will you put all this stuff? So a lot of architects seem to sketch up these houses without really thinking much about the heating and cooling system for Victoria. And I suggest people get input on that at an earlier stage.
Right, thanks. So, whenever we talk about reverse cycle air conditioners and, whether it's a multi-head or single split systems or ducted systems, or even when someone is trying to retrofit their house, this question always, comes, especially when, a lot of people have this evaporative cooling and gas ducted heating. Some of them have this big question: can I use the same ducts and just change my system and use the existing ducts and make it, all electric for heating and cooling? Can I go with that? If not, the other question would be, how do you differentiate, in terms of efficiency or maybe cost effectiveness? Which one would be better? Ducted reverse cycle air conditioners or multi-heads or single splits?
If you can avoid ducts, because in Australia, one thing we do, or in Victoria anyway, is we put those ducts outside of the building envelope. So they might be insulated, but they're not that well insulated. And we go and stick ducts like in, the terrifically hot roof space in the summertime, and then try to cool the house. I mean, that's a bit crazy. If you can have the ducts inside the thermal envelope, so that they are as well protected as the rest of the house, then ducts can be okay. But otherwise try to avoid ducted. The other thing with central ducted systems is a lot of my clients don't realize you got to leave the doors open, so that like if air comes into one room, it's got to get back to the return to close the loop and go around again in a closed loop. A lot of clients don't even realize how a ducted system works and what the return air is all about. So that can be another flaw with ducted systems. Recently, I published an article on Fifth Estate looking at evaporative cooling. And yeah, that combination in Victoria of the ducted gas in the ducts in the bottom and then evaporative cooling in the top, that's really not what we want to do anymore. Can you reuse like the ducted gas heatings for the ducted gas heating ducts for doing it with reverse cycle? Often the air conditioning people will say no, because the heat that comes out of a heat pump is going to be a bit more gentle, not as hot, but therefore you need bigger ducts to deliver the same amount of heat. So, and also you're going to want to use them for cooling as well, so you might need bigger ducts. So chances are you'll have to replace the ducts, but maybe that needs to be done anyway because they might be getting a bit old, dirty, or damaged.
Thanks. So some people are asking about geothermal heating. I just want to point out to everyone, Tim just talked about ground source heat pumps versus air source heat pumps. So when you say geothermal heating, that's basically ground source heat pumps. Okay, let me check a question about insulation. So this one question, and so this attendee is in Adelaide and they have a 1960s double brick flat, minimal insulation, and they're wondering how to inject insulation through plaster ceiling under flat metal roof. There's no access. So if anyone wants to answer that on the panel.
There are vendors insulating people in Melbourne, and there may be more than one now, who can blow in what they would call a glass wool material into limited roof spaces or into wall cavities. So again, if you were to get on the Facebook group and search for blow-in insulation, you'll see that it's a solid material. Like I say, a glass wool. It's treated to be such that it is not going to absorb water, but it's not a solid block of spray foam. It's more like a bunch of fluff that they blow into your wall space. And if you were to pull the weatherboards off, it would all fall out, that sort of thing. But yeah, there are some technologies there which are great. It'd be good to see more people offering those products.
Thanks.
I'd just add to that, possibly saying if it is a flat, though, there might be a need first to consult with a body corporate on changing the building fabric in any way. And I also, again, not an expert in designing for cold climates, but I understand one of the first things that you can do is go through and do good draft sealing even before you start talking about insulating. So I'd encourage anybody to go through that exercise, looking for any gaps. And Tim went through them on his presentation: skirtings around windows, architraves. Look for gaps, seal them, and see what sort of difference that makes for a start before you start considering insulation also.
Right. Thanks, Belinda. And I just want to add, I think there's one article about DIY draft proofing on Renew's website also. So if you can, search draft proofing DIY, you should be able to see a really good article. So just on the topic of draft proofing, I just want to ask this question. Someone has said that they have a 3-year-old house, and I think they went through draft proofing, but it's not as airtight as they would want it to be. So I hope I'm getting this question right. So they're saying they recently purchased a carbon dioxide meter, and they found out that the CO2 levels were relatively high inside the house, and they're based in Victoria, and they're wondering what is the best time to ventilate the house and not lose too much heat. If you want to comment on that.
Yeah, one thing about the Melbourne climate is you wait 10 minutes, it'll change. So yeah, certainly, you've been through a cold winter day when it's really windy and wet and everything. Well, that's a good time to have the windows closed. But yes, you do want to get some fresh air in and purge the carbon dioxide. So we certainly are cracking windows open whenever the sun comes out.
Right. Thanks. Whenever this ventilation question comes up, if someone is trying to retrofit or if someone is trying to construct a new house, they always have this question: should I go with heat recovery ventilation systems? Should I stick with reverse cycle? What should I choose? So, is there any comment from anyone on this? Carlos, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention, so yeah, I live in a passive house. I'm also, so I have a qualification in passive house design. I just wanted to point out that the mechanical ventilation system is not a heating or a cooling device. It's just mechanical ventilation. It just moves air around the house. What that heat exchange component does, it conserves energy. So once you've spent money running an air con or a heater to cool the air or heat it up, what that heat exchange does is as the ventilation systems is extracting the spent air, if you will, out of the house, it's pre-cooling or preheating the outside air coming in. That's all it does. So if you don't have an air con or a heater, the house is not going to cool down or heat up with a mechanical ventilation system. So you're just going to have fresh air inside the house.
Right. Yeah, but I think it's an amazing technology. I think I was at Richard Keach's house as part of the Cape Patterson's tour, and I saw a HRV for the first time, and it was great just to see how quiet it is, and you don't even realize how the fresh air is coming and how it's replacing the stale air, and it's such a smooth process.
Might I add, and the other thing, every 2-3 months when I go in to clean these HEPA filters, you realize how much dirt enters houses through open windows or through infiltration if you have drafts. So it keeps the air pretty clean inside too. A few months ago, the Perth Hills were burning quite a bit, and there was this dense smoke and haze throughout the city. And you'd walk into our house and it was just clean. It didn't smell smoke either, so it cleaned that aspect too. And of course, on nice days, you open up your windows too. Of course, it's not that we don't open up windows, but when the weather is too cold or too hot, it's nice to close those windows and still have fresh air inside.
Right. Thanks for that. So if someone is trying to retrofit a house, there's this one particular question. Let's say they don't want to go with a split system. They don't want to have an indoor unit on their wall, and they're wondering if there's something available in the market that provides more like a radiant heat. They can have that unit inside and can give them maybe more radiant heating and cooling. Does someone know anything about such plans?
Yeah, if you're thinking about air conditioning, I say go to a top vendor. I'll name one like Daikin. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries also gets a lot of votes from the members at the Facebook group. But what I like to do, maybe I'm old school, I go and collect all the hard copy brochures that they have, and I look through everything and I see absolutely everything that they have. And you may be surprised at what you find in all the options. There had been, for example, from Daikin, a particular brand of air conditioner that could give you radiant heat. It was brand named the Nexura. Now that may not exist on the Australian market anymore. I'm not sure. There may be some units still lying around, but it was a so-called floor standing or mounted down low on the wall unit that, yeah, it kind of looked like a hydronic radiator, but it was an air conditioner. It still did blow some air around, and it filtered the air, and it could cool your house in summer, but it could heat your house as well. And it also aimed for a radiant effect that, again, if you went and sat right next to it, it felt very comfortable. So that was Daikin. Maybe the next year is gone. Maybe something else will return. Maybe some of the other vendors will come up with something similar. I'm not sure, but yeah, just don't think that an air conditioner is just the thing you've seen up on the wall a million places. There's so many different options for how they can configure these things.
Right. Thanks. I want to switch for a second to another ventilation question. A lot of people have confusions, and there are so many things in the market. Someone would talk about just some kind of mechanical ventilation, maybe with a whirlybird. Someone has, let's say if they have solar, they might connect some kind of electrical, exhaust fan or something with the solar run it for free. So what kind of suggestions, if anyone on the panel wants to give to our attendees in this webinar, how to extract that heat that gets built up in your roof space?
Yeah, I'll have a go. There's a couple of ways to do it. Up here in the tropics, you also have to be aware that the item has to be cyclone proof. So a whirlybird might not be a good idea. They do make special ridge vents that extract air. But to extract any air out of a roof, you've got to have air coming in, generally in the soffits or somewhere. So there's a bit of an equation to that. And you can also back it up with a solar powered fan. But yes, moving air through a roof space is pretty important, I think, especially in the tropics.
Right, thanks. And I think...
And again, listening to Belinda and those comments there, it is interesting how there's things that make sense in the tropics that probably don't make sense in Melbourne, but we see them in Melbourne homes. So like those louver windows, and I had maybe another example, but also, so the roof space ventilation. So pretty much in Melbourne, we say, don't worry about it. Just get yourself a good thick layer of insulation that in your roof space that covers every single square centimeter of bare plaster, whether that's horizontal, vertical, or in between. Quite often, as I said, we go into roof spaces and we see lots of bare plaster there. So that should have a big thick layer of insulation on it. And then, yeah, if you can get some of that ventilation occurring in the roof space, that's fine. That's a bonus, but you don't need to spend any money on it. And even whirlybirds even blow away, you know, in winds that are short of a cyclone. Someone did a calculation, and the amount of heat hitting a roof in Melbourne or any other place in Australia is so enormous, you'd practically need a jet engine to really ventilate the whole roof space adequately. So putting a couple whirlybirds on is not really going to do anything.
Right. Okay. And does anyone else want to add anything to this?
Look, I'll add to that. I mean, to extract air is one thing, but you've got to stop the heat coming in to start with. So that's where a good insulation with a high R value underneath the roof sheeting is probably step one, I would say.
Right. Yeah. So on the insulation topic, so someone is asking, let's say if you have some insulation, it's an old insulation, you know, it has got damaged from various factors with time. So can you just top that up with new insulation, new batts, or do you need to properly remove the old one and then, you know, have a clean set of batts and then start doing it from scratch?
I can have a go at that one if you like. I would say it depends what type of insulation it is and what condition it's in. Whether there's any kind of hygiene issues with vermin, for example, any reason to get rid of it. If it's largely in good condition and there's just a few missing bits, I would say just patch up and provide additional where you need to. If it really is a mess, then maybe there is a case for re-insulating, removing and re-insulating. You'll find that to be a very unpleasant and large job to do, though.
Right. And just to add on that, if someone wants to insulate, you know, have underfloor insulation, but there's not a lot of room to move underneath, you know, that floor. So how do you handle that kind of insulation problem?
Yeah, the vendors who would want to put down those long rolls of polyester and staple them up, which is certainly recommended down here in Victoria. Yeah, but they do talk about needing about 600 so that they can actually crawl in there. Although you might find some vendors, if he's got a particularly willing small employee, they might be able to do something better. I'm still digging underneath our house here in Sandringham. We're too close to the sand, so I'd really love to at least get some insulation under the old bathroom floor. That would make it feel much nicer. I'm even thinking about some of the spray foam options, because maybe some spray foam can get into places that no one will ever be able to staple a bat to.
There's probably a dovetail into this topic from a tropical perspective, and the building code would often suggest that we need to put underfloor insulation in low settle raised houses here also. But the other consideration that comes into that is if you've got a timber floor, suspended timber floor and you seal in underneath it, you start to create issues with differential in moisture and temperature. And my own personal stance on this is I would rather not insulate. It's probably supported by the fact that we try to leave our houses free running and having them naturally ventilated anyway. But when we do houses like that, we get our energy assessor to model them, and we make sure that it's compensated for in other ways, and that they're achieving the star rating, well above the star rating they need to achieve.
Right. Thanks.
Hey, AJ,
Yeah,
the only thing I would add there to both of your comments is, yeah, the condensation management is an issue with this insulation, and you just need to make sure that the material is vapor permeable, basically. Even especially that foamed insulation you're mentioning, Tim, some of that stuff can sometimes be vapor impermeable, which is when the problems start.
Right. So this is to all the panelists. So there's a big problem. I think you have covered this to quite an extent. So a lot of people are concerned about mold formation, and of course you need to have good ventilation. We understand that. Is there anything else people let's say if you don't have a big budget and maybe you are going for some little tweaks in your house, maybe there's some tips you want to give to them, or if someone is trying to construct a new house or maybe a passive house, are there any generic tips people should be thinking about to reduce mold formation but still having that air tightness and good insulation?
It's a lot of people want to speak on this.
Yeah,
So I'll go very quickly. Firstly, I can partly answer that in the tropics, with the exception of your last comment, because up here the key from our perspective to managing mold is natural ventilation and sunlight, light and ventilation. So again, we don't want to close houses in. We'd rather have, for example, in walk-in robes in bedrooms, have them have their own windows so they're getting cross-ventilated, and things will still get mouldy up here, particularly if you live near the rainforest, but the more natural ventilation and sunlight you can have, the easier it is to manage.
Right. Thanks, Belinda.
Here's one maybe from left field. Don't add moisture to your living space that you don't have to. So a lot of my clients, I'll say, do you have a clothes dryer? And that's another thing we've demonized. And a lot of my clients will say, no, don't have a clothes dryer. Of course, we hang our clothes outside when we can, and we'll dry them over the ducted gas heater or before the wood fire or something inside the house. Well, that can be liters of water that you're adding to your living space. And if your house is leaky which may be the case, like if you've got a wood burner, well then, okay, that moisture would probably disappear maybe, and maybe you don't have a problem with it. But if we start to tighten up the house, we do have to change some of these practices, such as just drying laundry within the living space. And fortunately, these days, heat pump condensing clothes dryers exist. So if you put off buying a clothes dryer for your whole life, go down to the shops when they're open, and you'll see up to the upper end there. And this is mostly what they sell these days: 7, 8, 9, 10-star heat pump condensing clothes dryers. They're extremely efficient. They've got a refrigerant system in there that doesn't really let any of the heat escape. It just keeps using it over and over again. But the most important thing to me is it condenses all the moisture into a little bin that you can then take out and put on a pot plant. So, and that's how, I've recognized that this is liters of water when you dry some towels or dry some sheets. And if you've been trying to dry that in a house, where did all that moisture go? It can permeate right through your plaster and then cause the mold on the insulation there that I showed photos of.
Thanks, Tim. I think Tony wanted to say something.
Look, I was just going to make a comment that seems to be forgotten with people retrofitting, is if you have electrical circuitry laid on the ceiling and then you go and lay a massive amount of ceiling insulation over the top of that, it can actually affect the capacity of the circuitry by anything up to 20 or 30%. It reduces it. So before you start throwing it in, you better make sure that you have the capacity in the circuits to take that loss.
Right. Thanks. There are a few questions about roof material. So there are many, and it would take a lot of time if I start going through them one by one. So I would just ask if you guys want to say something or give some kind of tips on what to look for, because some people, let's say, they have metallic roof and they are worried that it gets much more hotter. So should they choose some other material? So material-wise, do you want to suggest something, or maybe want to talk about reflective foil insulation underneath, or some kind of insulation? You might have covered this already, but maybe quickly you want to say something. Yeah.
I can say from the tropics, because of the cyclones that we experience up here, roof tiles are not a practical option. We generally just have metal roof sheeting, Colorbond roof sheet. And again, it would just come down to the climate you're designing for. Up here, a reflective foil under it, or a double foil faced insulation blanket under it will do a great job, and you'll certainly easily exceed what's required under the Building Code of Australia with regards to insulating the building fabric. That's probably what I would say about building for subtropics or tropics.
Right. Thanks. Anyone else? Tim?
And even in Melbourne, with climate change, there's going to be more severe storms and winds. And I think the steel roofs are fairly robust compared to the tile options. And even if a tree falls, I think maybe you might see even less damage with steel potentially in some situations versus the tiles. So we've got that steel roof, and I think I'm pretty happy with that going forward. As we get more severe weather, but I think I will get a roofer up there and put a few more screws into the thing.
Right. Carlos, Tony?
I was just going to say, light colours are the secret, but fashion tends to kick in a lot. I've probably 9 out of 10 houses these days have a monument roof, which is very dark, and you're just making the roof space an oven and making everything work twice as hard. So you've got to try and just reflect the heat before it even gets into the house.
Right. Yeah.
The other final aspect of roof sheet is to make sure you've got the right profile that can handle the volume of water, the capacity for the roof pitch that you've got. So you're meeting the manufacturer specifications or performance limitations.
Right. Thanks. Carlos, you seem like you want to add something.
Yeah, I think they've covered it all. But yeah, light colored roofs and the right amount of insulation in the ceiling, you won't have issues with heat penetrating into the house. The roof cavity might get hot, but it doesn't matter because you've already blocked yourself with that ceiling insulation.
Right. Thanks.
I might just add one more before we disappear off that. And it was touched on a couple of webinars last week. Some of the insulations that are sold these days sell it as what appears to be a high R rating, but it's actually the whole system is rated, and it's not the same as rating an insulation itself. Say a blanket, double-sided blanket, you can get an R 1.4 or a 1.8. Then you have a whole system of the airspace in the roof, and the plasterboard gives you a total rating. But the things that I see happening up here never seem to achieve the rating that they expect, because they totally rely on this 40 mil air gap that's supposed to be between this reflective insulation and the sheet roofing. And up here, that's just not possible because you have battens at such close centres. Even with the fall-through system, they'll put another batten in between. So the air gap is never achieved. So these high numbers that people are expecting actually don't appear. And the whole thing to me is driven by roofers who like to lay these easy foils, which are as expensive as a good blanket anyway, and it's really driven by the builder or the roofer, and the client really doesn't appreciate that they're not getting what they think they're getting.
Okay, thanks a lot. We don't have a lot of time, so I actually have 2 questions I really wanted to ask, and I thought I'll just run them by you quickly. So one thing that I have not heard, and someone asked if someone has heard about solar AC/DC hybrid ducted system. I was wondering if, okay, cool, no problem. Another one quickly. So people talk about the life, the life cycle of heat pump, be it for hot water or for space heating. Plus, some people are worried about, maybe they're close to the sea. They're worried if their compressor might get corroded or something. So, is there any quick tips, maybe in terms of positioning the compressor, or maybe there's nothing to worry? So, anyone?
I've definitely seen, the outside unit of air conditioners. I live down here in Sandringham, Victoria, so not far from the beach. Some of the houses you see can get fairly rusted out. I think there are different quality of units you can buy with that marine situation in mind, better quality of paints that they might come with, but I'm not exactly sure. But no, it is a good question, because you can certainly see some equipment that rusts out faster due to the salt situation.
Okay, thanks. I think I'll just ask one last question. A lot of people are concerned about how to dispose of their appliances, which have refrigerants, in a more responsible way. So, they do understand, I believe, the old refrigerants had higher global warming potential. So maybe if you want to add something about what kind of refrigerant to look for now, because now we have more advanced technology, and how can they dispose of the old ones responsibly?
Yeah, with the hot water heat pumps, you can get hot water heat pumps that have carbon dioxide or propane refrigerant, and those don't have a global warming potential of much. Carbon dioxide one, of course, but it's not 600 or 1200 or something like that, which you might get with the other refrigerants. So for hot water, you do have some options. If that's a concern, well then go for the refrigerants, the carbon dioxide or the propane. Those aren't available. You can even get propane for space heating, air conditioning, but you'd probably struggle to do that, but it could be possible. And then otherwise, just make sure you're working with licensed people, and we just have to hope they're doing the proper thing with the refrigerants.
Right.
But certainly some of the older, some of the older equipment I still see equipment with like R22, which even has a big ozone impact as well as a global warming impact. Something to look out for is, people talk about topping up refrigerant. Well, that's not really a great thing. That means you've leaked some, and unless someone's really, really sure they found the leak, you're going to top it up and it's going to leak again. So this is something to be concerned about. With the refrigerators or heat pumps that I've ever owned, I've never had to top up refrigerant. That's good, but of course it happens if someone hasn't installed it properly or done a connection properly. But to just keep continually topping up, that's an indication of a bigger problem.
Right, thanks. So unless anyone else wants to add anything to this, I would say this was my last question, and it's up to you guys if you want to add any kind of remarks before we close this session. Okay, no, that's okay. So I just want to apologize because there were so many questions, and it was really hard for me to see them, and maybe there were a lot of repetitive questions also. So really sorry if I couldn't ask your question at this point, but I tried my best. And I want to thank all the panelists, Tim, Belinda, Tony, Carlos. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all this knowledge. And thanks a lot to all the attendees. Now I would like to hand over to Maddie.
Hello again, everyone, and I'd like to add my own thanks to AJ. Thank you for being a wonderful MC, as well as all our panelists and presenters, and to everyone in the audience who's contributed a truly astonishing number of questions. I think there are 70 plus currently open, which definitely demonstrates the appetite there is for these kinds of informational evenings. Before we go, I'd like to remind everyone that our Sustainable House Day is this weekend. It is October 17, and there is a full day of free events, which apart from anything else is another chance to ask your question and hopefully hear from some experts who can give you the answers you need. So it's a really fantastic program. I'm just going to very quickly say some of my favorites, which are there'll be a webinar on designing for accessibility and aging in place in your own home, on designing for bushfires, on sustainability and the budget, on being your own owner builder. It's a really amazing full day. I deeply recommend you go to our program at sustainablehouseday.com and see if there's anything that interests you, because so many people have come together to do such a lot of work in making this kind of incredible environmental work really accessible. We'd also like to obviously thank our sponsors and council members for making Sustainable House Day possible. Without their support, this kind of event, especially long running over weeks, would absolutely not be feasible. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. We really appreciate your time, and we hope you have an absolutely lovely week.